All right, good afternoon. Let's get going. So today's class is about testimonial injustice. And so I had you read the first chapter of Miranda Fricker's book on testimonial injustice. I think testimonial injustice is a really great concept. It does a thing that I love it when philosophers are able to do. It's an easy enough concept to grasp. Like once it's explained to you, it makes sense. But also once you have a term for it, you start seeing it all over the place. I think one of the most pervasive effects of language is on thinking is that when we have short, easy words for things, we tend to notice them more. Whereas if we have to explain them at length, they don't pop out as much. So I feel like Fricker, by introducing the notion of testimonial injustice, did a really good service philosophically, because she gave us just this kind of concept, a concept that is easy to understand, and also suddenly you realize it's everywhere once you have a name for it. There are actually a bunch of different concepts that she outlines in the first part of the essay that sort of lead into the introduction of the idea of testimonial injustice. And a lot of those concepts are on the review sheet for chapter or section 2 for the second test, which I haven't been emphasizing as much as I did the first time around, but it is still here, and you should be using this to keep notes on the different concepts. These are all concepts that are going to be possibly on the test, right? And so since the test is open book and open note, if you've got good notes, you can do well. So, for instance, some of the terms that come up here in this chapter that are on the review sheet isn't just testimonial injustice. It's also social power, identity power, and active and passive uses of power are all important concepts there. All right. That said, testimonial injustice itself is a fairly straightforward idea. It just comes from the ordinary phenomenon that sometimes you are right and people don't believe you. And often people, when they don't believe you, even though you're right, they are doing it for stupid reasons, right? Including, especially, not what you say, but who you are. So I want to start out just by with an autobiographical exercise to prime us for understanding what Fricker is going to be talking about. I've just got 3 questions here. Right? Describe a time that you weren't believed, even though you were right. This could be something big, could be something small. Just think about it. And then explain why you weren't believed and whether this felt like morally unjust. Were you wronged somehow by people not believing you? So we'll just start with this. So yeah, those were some great examples. And one of the things that I like about it is that a lot of those examples are from fairly ordinary situations. And they're not all necessarily the kind of big identity issues that Fricker is going to be talking about, which are mostly about race and gender and that sort of thing. They can also be about little things like, I'm a kid or I'm a newbie or whatever. So it shows, I think, the credibility economy is the phrase that gets used. Who is believed, who isn't? It's a complicated economy. So the other thing I like about this part of Fricker's essay is that it begins with it takes a very top-down approach. It starts out with some of the biggest concepts around, right? And then tries to it then uses those big concepts to create a situation where you can understand the smaller concepts. So she actually starts out by talking about social power. And this seems pretty straightforward, right? It's the power to change things in the social world, right? So if physical power is the power to change things in the physical world, social power is the power to change things in the social world. And this might seem like it's not that big a deal or fairly obvious, but a lot of stuff actually starts to follow from this. So again, I've been trying to talk about the difference between physical reality and social reality. Physical reality might be the Rio Grande. There can be physical power to change the Rio Grande. You can build a dam, you can build canals, people do big water projects all the time. The border between Texas and Mexico is social reality. It is enforced by it exists because of people's actions. So social power is the ability to change social reality. And it comes from, it has all sorts of different manifestations, but in the end, they all wind up being a part of people's behavior. So social power, a lot of people in politics will get really Machiavellian, and they'll say, or not even Machiavellian, but just like people will say things like political power comes from the barrel of a gun, right? Political power is all combat, all force. And that's true in that some political power comes from violence. A border is enforced mostly by violence, right? There are troops, there are Customs and Border Patrol, ICE. There is violence that creates that bit of social reality. But there are other parts of social reality that are not really directly created through violence at all. My other main example of social reality is money. Money is incredibly important. And although there's violence involved with money all the time, most of what makes money valuable is habit, trust, and expectation, right? Do I have any money? No, I have a nickel. I believe this has value because everyone around me is in the habit of assigning it a tiny, tiny amount of value. And I trust that those habits will continue. The value of this is dependent entirely on large-scale group social behavior, right? So you can also think about the ability of powerful individuals to change social reality. The government can, by decree, change the border pretty well. You can issue new orders to the soldiers that will talk about how the border is supposed to be enforced. Direct control over the value of money is much harder, as anyone who's tried to fight inflation or do any kind of macroeconomic intervention knows. All right. So this is our huge level concept, social power. It's the power to change social reality. I guess the other thing that I want to emphasize is that a lot of social power comes from irrational, habitual behavior. So it's neither coercion nor reason. It's mostly just people copying each other. It's not the power of the gun, it's not the power of the pen. It's the power of relationships. So here's an interesting fact about vaccine hesitancy. We're really used to thinking about it as being a factor of ideology. There's now this firm belief that people who are hesitant about vaccines are doing so because they're Fox News viewers and they've been pumped full of, ideology that says don't take the vaccine. But if you study it carefully, I don't have the citation for this, but it is on my computer. People broke it down, and the main effect is not about what news outlets you watch, but what individuals you associate with. People are likely to get a vaccine if their friends are getting the vaccine. People are unlikely to get the vaccine if their friends are not getting the vaccine. The main conduit for social power is just people wanting to belong to their immediate social group, to do what their friends do, to do what their families do. Mere copying, which is neither the power of the sword nor the power of the pen, is a huge dominant social factor. All right, so that said, most of what we're talking about here now most of what we're going to be talking about from here on out is how social power winds up affecting rational, what I was referring to just now is the power of the pen, but also the power of speech, the power of rational persuasion, right? So Fricker's mostly interested in identity power. And she emphasizes that identity power can be used actively or passively, right? So an active use of power is when someone changes the social world through deliberate action, right? And so she uses parking enforcement. You can also think of a police officer. A police officer writes a speeding ticket. That is an active use of power. There are also passive uses of power. And again, I think the speeding ticket example is great because everyone has been on the highway and you see a cop and everyone goes from 75 to 55, right? That's passive power. The world changes because someone knows that this person could use their power actively, even though they're not, right? It's also identity power. Being a cop is an identity that takes with it power. It's just used passively. The other thing to think about here is the relationship between active and passive power. If you don't use power actively and often enough, the passive power wears off. And so you think about people whose social power lies in violence. It's actually really important for them to periodically demonstrate that, to keep it real, to show that they mean business, to in fact use violence. This happens both in like the political arena, national violence, and individual violence, like with say gangbangers. Sometimes you need to beat up or kill an enemy, not so much because you want to neutralize that person, but because you want the other people to know that you've got that power. The same thing happens on the national scale. One nation might invade another, not just to invade that nation, but to show the nations around it that they have power. All right. Agential power and structural power. So again, we're getting the feel of the various ways that power works socially. And all of this becomes the context for understanding testimonial injustice. Power can happen between individuals, right? Agential power is just relating to an agent. So if a police car shows up and another driver slows down, the policeman is being an agent, exercising direct power over someone else. A lot of power is far more diffuse than that, right? Structural power is power in social structures. We define structural injustice as an injustice that happens through a social structure that many people participate in, right? We can also talk about the power of that structure. power exercised by a social structure that many people participate in is structural power, and this is a pervasive form of power. Building codes. Building codes will mandate that buildings have to be handicapped accessible in some ways, but not others, right? Wheelchair accessibility tends to be emphasized, for instance. This is the result of a social structure, the building code, which is huge and elaborate and brings in an entire industry and an entire branch of government, right? Many people participate in it. All right. So the other important thing to remember is that even a gentle power winds up relying on structural power. It's pretty rare for one individual to, by sheer force of their own physical ability, be able to control others. So if you think about violence as a form of power, the most concentrated violence, form of violent power, is going to lie in armies. Armies exist because of structural power, right? A general has the ability to inflict a lot of power via violence, but the general himself is probably old and in poor health, right? The power comes from the structure. The example actually that Fricker uses is grading, right? And so I feel it's important sometimes to just acknowledge the power relations in the room. As a teacher, I have power because I give grades. That grade is that power is almost entirely structural. I can enter the grade into the computer, but that's just me typing letters unless the rest of the social structure exists, right? The social structure of the college, the social structure of employers and other schools looking at transcripts and recognizing their validity. And interestingly, there again, that is a social structure that's not built, that is structural power that doesn't come from violence, but from trust and expectation. The value of a diploma from LCCC is like the value of money. It comes because you assume that it will be worth, employers will recognize it, and it comes with the faith of the college that we've actually managed to impart some skills and knowledge and responsibility on you. So it's based on trust and expectation. All right, so this leads at the end of the first section of her essay. She gives us a definition of social power. Practically situated social capacity to control others' actions, which can be exercised passively or actively, or it can operate purely structurally. Social power is power to control social reality. Social reality is created through people's behavior. Social power is essentially the ability to influence other people's behavior. It's really that simple. All right. I think if you begin to see the world through the lens of this sort of concept, it changes your understanding of social interaction. And it also changes your understanding of what kind of power you have, what kind of power you might lack, what kind of power you might want, right? All right. So having established a background that is just about power, we can talk now about testimonial injustice. I've described the branches of philosophy before, and I like to repeat these definitions because it's something that It's good if you can walk away from this class remembering these words, because then you'll walk away having a vague memory of what philosophy is about. And I know people don't always take away from classes all the detailed information, but it's good to have a sense of what we're talking about. So one important branch of philosophy is epistemology. Epistemology is the study of knowledge, what knowledge is and how to get it. It turns out that the main way we get knowledge is through listening to other people. So, I mean, if you think about things that you know, sure, some of them you might know just from direct experience. There's a heck of a lot of things that you can be pretty confident that you don't know through your own experience. So, how many people know that the earth is round? This is not supposed to be a trick question. This is just supposed to get you to raise your hand. You don't have to if you don't really believe if you're not sure you know the world is round. But trust me, the earth is round. You believe the earth is round. You know the earth is round. How many people have personally circumnavigated the globe? I've gotten asked to this question sometimes. Because whenever I get a yes, it's because the person's been in the military, right? They've been all over. We know the earth is round largely on the basis of testimony, right? We are constantly giving information to each other and trusting it, right? Epistemic injustice is the injustice that happens when one is wronged in one's capacity as a knower. We know things, we share information, and we can be wronged in this respect. So this gets back to the exercise. Those were meant to stimulate examples of testimonial injustice, or epistemic injustice more broadly. Cases big or small where you are wronged in your capacity as a knower. So testimonial injustice is a subset of epistemic injustice. Epistemic injustice is just related to knowledge in general. Testimonial injustice relates to when your assertions are not believed because they are given the wrong amount of credibility. Now, interestingly, one of the things that Fricker emphasizes is that actually testimonial justice can happen either as a credibility deficit or a credibility excess. So it turns out, and if you think about this, this makes sense. There's some people out there who are believed too easily, right? In her example, a lot of her examples are around gender. So if you're not believed sometimes because you're a woman, you might be believed sometimes because you're a man. And that may also be an injustice. It can certainly be to your disadvantage that people don't challenge you enough, right? You think about certain powerful leaders who are clearly just surrounded by yes men. And no one ever tells them things like, that comb over looks stupid, right? They are, in a sense, wronged. Nevertheless, Fricker says that the main cases of credibility, testimonial injustice are about credibility deficits. This is what she calls it, the paradigmatic case, I think. These are situations where you are not believed because of your identity. And she wants to focus on large-scale identity prejudices. So this is where we're going to get to things like race and gender, right? So actually that's it for the slides, and that'll also be it for the recording.